Hi everybody, and welcome to today's webinar where we're going to be looking at why you should be considering Microsoft Teams as a telephony solution, particularly in a compliance environment. Today's webinar, we're going to be delving into some of the challenges that our panelists have observed working with their customers in financial services and insurance. We're going to be exploring a bit about specifically some of the challenges that hybrid working is bringing to the market, and looking at some of the technologies that are available that can actually help businesses to effectively communicate and collaborate in a regulated way. Specifically, we're going to be looking at Microsoft Teams. Obviously, that should be come across in the title. And we're going to end by giving you some practical hints and tips that if you're thinking about using Microsoft Teams as a telephony solution, that our panelists, our experts, recommend that you actually kind of take a look at. Should be taking about 30 minutes for the discussion, and there should be some time afterwards for any questions that you might have along the way. So, first of all, let's do some introductions. My name's Mark Elwood, and I'm the Marketing Director at Teleware. And Teleware are a partner of Bytes, and so I'm going to be joined today by Al Cumberworth. Hi Al, how are you doing?
Very good morning. How are you, Mark?
Excellent. And so you're the Microsoft Unified Communications Specialist at Bytes. So hopefully you're going to be bringing some good expertise along to the discussion today around that kind of whole Microsoft technology side of things.
Yeah, absolutely. So just a bit of background. So I've been working with Microsoft for the past 13 years, from sort of OCS days, so helping customers with large-scale desktop transformation projects with a heavy focus on voice, and obviously working with the ISV community to kind of plug technology gaps.
Excellent. And we're also joined by Mike Levy, who's the President and CEO of Mnemonics. Hi, Mike. How are you doing?
Hey, good morning. How are you all doing?
Very good, thank you. Very good. So I think for those people who are viewing live, it's probably worth mentioning that Mike's over in Florida at the moment, so it's a very early start for Mike. So thank you very much for getting up early and joining us this morning.
You're welcome. I'm glad that I can share a little bit. Also, just a little bit of a background. Mnemonics has been a specialist in the recording and capture space for roughly 10 years. We bring a lot of experience through our team, and we've been also in the Microsoft space, especially really since the days of Lync, being one of the first qualified vendors to record Lync, then Skype for Business, and obviously now the big name is Teams at the moment, especially even with Microsoft yesterday announcing some really big numbers for Teams. So really excited to be here. So thank you for inviting me.
No, it's brilliant to have you here, and I would like later to kind of cover off in a little bit more detail around how some of this technology works and how it can actually help people in financial services to kind of cover off the recording side of things from a Teams perspective. And so I think I'll just do a little bit more around kind of Teleware and who we are. We are a communications specialist. We've been developing our own software in the market for 30 years now. We've been working specifically in financial services for over a decade. In call recording, we're the biggest provider of SIM-based mobile call recording in the world, and we've got a number of big clients and also some not so big in financial services as well. And we're a partner of Bytes, so we've got a great relationship between Teleware and Bytes, and hopefully we're able to add lots of value to Bytes customers who are looking at kind of at Teams recording. So it's great to have you all listening today. So I just wanted to kick things off to you both by kind of just wanting to start exploring what some of the challenges are that businesses in financial services and insurance are facing out in the market today. So Al, come to you first. So kind of what sort of thoughts have you got? What experiences have you got around that?
So I suppose since the start of the pandemic, obviously when the big red panic button got hit, what seems a very long time ago now, you know, we've seen, you know, this more hybrid working environment, but especially in financial services and the customers I work with who have, you know, are moving towards M365 and more towards voice and looking to move up to sort of E5. You know, historically they've got on-premise call managers and buyers, whatever PBX they've got. They've also got things like Actians of various Redbox, various different compliant technologies which they've been using, and then, you know, things like contact center users. So some of the challenges have really been when people are looking at moving to Teams Voice, and how they migrate away from legacy platforms and how they go around designing that in. You know, there's a lot to be taken into consideration from that new world of working and what they have to consider from how they get from point A to point B. You know, and obviously then we start to look at things like, you know, connectivity at home, whether they're using things like VPNs to connect back into the office if they need to do recording. You know, all of these bring huge amounts of technology challenges for IT departments and decision makers, really, how that new world is going to look like. So there's a lot of pre-work that needs to be done when designing that in, and obviously looking from an architecture standpoint, you know, even in that Teams and then Cisco environment, for example, how that coexistence should look. And then some of the challenges around, you know, end user training and adoption. How do I get my users using this technology properly when they're working from home? How do I go through that end user training and adoption program? So there's all these different types of technology challenges, as well as, you know, the kind of what is effectively sprawl. So what has been classified as shadow IT, where companies have got lots of different technology in there. So there's a lot to take into consideration when we're looking more around the compliance challenges. And Mike, I'll let you touch a bit more on that.
Yeah, that's also, and thank you. Yeah, I couldn't have said it better. I think you covered a tremendous amount there. What's interesting is this slippery slope with compliance, is how there are so many laws to comply with. What we have been seeing is that there was a little bit of relaxing during the pandemic, but things are really starting to tighten up again. And the challenges that people faced initially, even at the pandemic, was, okay, now everyone's working from home. How do we do things? Like El, you mentioned VPN in. Not so easy to get people at home just to keep following the same protocols and procedures to be able to, you know, log in to work from home. How do you, on legacy recording, how do you make sure that everyone has a static IP address? Because if you have, you know, if you have a recorder on a local premise and then you've got to hit your end users targeted with IP addresses or MAC addresses. So we'll discuss that, I'm sure, a little bit later on how Teams has helped with that ability to make it far more elegant, but also how certain things have evolved within the space, especially that we play in, to accommodate those at-home environments. For example, people were having meetings at the office, which are essentially internal discussions. Now all of a sudden you get to a case where that's online and you're recording everything. How do I exclude that? So there's a lot of flexibility, a lot of evolution in dealing with compliance, but yet dealing with internal compliance as well, where you've got to stick to regulation from a regulator point of view, but also you don't want to break your internal rules and compliance as well.
Great. And I think it's one thing kind of when everybody's working at home, but what about hybrid working? Because obviously we're moving away from kind of lockdowns and things now, hopefully forever, and into more of a hybrid working space. So what sort of new challenges does that throw up?
Well, from our point of view, we are actually seeing more at home staying intact. There was some study in the US recently about people now choosing flexibility above all things in business, which means that initially the pandemic brought the at-home work environment, and now it's more, hey, I've been at home for so long, I enjoy being at home. All this new technology is allowing me to go and stay at an Airbnb for a week, just at random times, and keep working without missing a beat. So I think all this hybrid technology now has allowed people to be far more flexible in the workplace, and that's the word, flexibility. Teams users now at 270 million monthly active users. That's huge, really,
Yeah.
from 14 million 2.5 years ago to 270 million now. That's a success story in itself.
It's incredible, isn't it? What about Al? What about you? Is it kind of anything to add to that from a hybrid perspective?
Yeah, I think, and I'm always big on employee experience and well-being. You know, I talk a lot around it, and you know how technology can help that. And you know what we've seen, especially through lockdown, is a lot of burnout. You know, because people are sat on video conference calls, literally back to back to back to back, and you know you get fatigued, you get burnt out. And it's about how do you help employees mitigate against that, and how do you, look after employees and make sure that their wellness is paramount. Because that productivity gain, that burnout, is a bit of a double-edged sword. So it's also, what we're looking at and what's Microsoft doing around that. And I know there's things like Beaver coming out, but also the development of things like chatbots, or wellness bots, that Q&A that can have a conversation with somebody in the morning, about how they're feeling, and then again through analytics, looking at how people are working on a day-to-day basis and making them aware that, look, you need to take a break, you need to take a bit of time out, step away from the office, go out for a walk, schedule time in to look after yourself, make sure that, you're not suffering from fatigue.
And I think brilliant points there, Al. I think one of the other things, though, is that I've been looking at is the market. It's an employees market. It's very competitive out there in terms of recruiting and retaining the best talent. And I was looking at some stats that we're seeing here in the UK, and I don't know, Mike, whether this is replicated in the US as well. But we're seeing starting salaries of £150,000 in law firms for new graduates. And then, any thoughts around kind of how kind of firms are actually competing to attract and retain the best talent?
I mean, that is definitely, technology placement, because the more flexibility you give to new starters, the better experience they have. And again, having things like, onboarding, for example, having that prescribed process, they've got learning and adoption portals they can go onto, to get that information readily, easily accessibility, and providing with the right tools to work with is incredibly important when you're trying to attract and also retain the best talent, because the better experience you can give to your employees, the more likely to stay. Whereas, if you're giving them 6 different products to use for different modalities, it just ends up in real confusion, and it's not a great experience. And that really affects people. On what I've seen, it does kind of affect that onboarding and people moving around as well. So having the right technology and also having the right training and adoption in there is so crucial to that successful area of attracting and retaining the best talent.
Absolutely.
Yes.
So go on, Mike.
Sorry. Yeah, I can agree with you more. Also seeing similar things here, driving this workforce adoption is technology, which enables companies to easier onboard people in this hybrid workspace, which again is driven through flexibility. So granted, yes, these higher salaries, but also this combination of just flexibility, having this ability to detach, get out there, go sit somewhere on a lake and work for the day, or on a lake, or sit in the countryside, or even take your mobile phone and go and play golf while you're on your client for the day. So absolutely agreed.
I think we've all kind of done some reassessment of our work-life balances as a result of the pandemic, and absolutely we've shown that we can work outside of the confines of the office. Some other stats that we've got on the screen there around the expectations now that employees have, that they demand that they're going to be able to work flexibly, and as we come out of that. So yeah, I think there's some really interesting points that you covered off there. So just hold that thought, because I'd like to go to the audience now and ask a poll question. So I'm really interested to find out where you all are on your hybrid working journey. So if you could select which most closely mirrors your own experiences within your company. So whether you haven't started yet, whether you've made some progress but you've still got a long way to go, you made some decent progress. You've either got most or all of the people who want or need hybrid working and they're all set up, or actually it's not something that you're considering at all. So I'll just give you a few seconds to respond to that, and do please, because it'd be quite interesting for us to see kind of where you all are on your hybrid working journey. So how do we see the results?
Drop on the screen there, so it's quite a lot
Sorry.
of progress being made, which is good news.
So I'm just on a technical issue. So Al, if you couldn't mind just go through those, they're not showing on my screen.
Okay, so we've got 60% of people have got a long way to go. 38% of people say they've made decent progress, and a staggering 56% of people who said they've got most or nearly all set up for hybrid, who want it or need it, and 0% not something we're considering, which is no surprise there. So,
Now,
thank you all.
Yeah. So what are your thoughts on that, guys?
Well, I think going back to, again, that big red panic button that got hit, I mean, the amount of organisations that I have worked with, especially that were in the process, say, for example, on Skype for Business, and we're saying, yeah, we're going to look at Teams in 6 to 9 months because it's immature, everything, all of that, and then big red panic button gets hit. And then everybody's, pretty much, I'd say 90% of everybody I worked with from a Microsoft perspective did exactly the same thing, which is a great enabler, for the hybrid working journey. And then obviously people are starting to look more around, well, how can I look at consolidation? How can I, save costs? What we're doing with office space? Are people going to return back? So there's all of these considerations. People even say, I don't want desk phones anymore because it's just something else that has to be cleaned. So there's definitely so much to take into consideration on that front.
Yeah, and just from our perspective, what we saw initially was the huge adoption of the underlying technology, the platform. We saw a greater rush in maybe smaller business to the ancillary apps that are involved along with it, but more recently, the larger enterprise adopting all the ancillary applications that go on top of it. So it was a quick rush to the technology of being able to collaborate remotely. And now with the enterprise is all, what else can I do now to enable people, because we're seeing, hold on a second, this is going to be staying sort of in this way. You saw 57% in that poll said we'd like to remain working hybrid and not always in the office. So I think larger enterprises are now understanding that, okay, we are going to have to now fully understand and adopt the hybrid workspace, whereas initially a lot of the smaller business adopted it very quickly, all those additional, but now the larger enterprise is diving in a big way.
Yeah, and just to pick up on something that I think you both said is around that kind of that rush to technology. And what are some of the challenges with that? Where firms kind of just buying in too much technology, the wrong technologies, or is that, and are they now consolidating that? What's your viewpoints on some of that stuff?
I think they're you could say they're consolidating more on a single platform because everyone used multiple. I was on a call recently where someone said, so we're using this for collaboration, we're using Slack for something else, we're using, and I'm sure Elle, being the expert on Teams, will tell you more how everything is just centralizing into one now and making it much easier for everyone to manage, much more cost effective. And because there are now available apps that complement this one technology, you're able to really focus on one technology that gives you everything without, again, having a desk phone, having one double click to get into one program and another click. It's just one point of focus.
I think one of the big areas is, people are just hit that big red panic button, push Teams out without actually giving it due consideration as to how that should be set up and educating users into how that should be set up. And unfortunately, I'm a big advocate of doing your due diligence and going through a predefined process to ensure that when you do roll out new technology, you're doing it and following best practice methodologies. Because all that's happened now is you've got people who've use scripts to create channels and then they can't see certain information, and they've got this huge problem where they've got to retrofit the design in and then start educating end users into how they should be using it properly in terms of setting teams up. And it's a very different landscape to what was the Skype for Business era, should I say, where you had sites, let's say SharePoint on premise, you had System Center, and then you started to say, right, well, everybody's using Teams. This is the central repository for accessing all data, intranets, everything else. It's a completely different world to how it was, a couple of years ago. So all of this needs to be taken into consideration when you're designing this technology and before you're rolling it out, and ensuring that you're going through that due diligence, again, change management, engine track chaining, adoption, not just on Teams, but, if you start to look at moving things like System Center to Endpoint Manager, what you're doing there, you've still got to educate the end user across, how they need to use this technology, and more importantly, why change is so good, how it's going to benefit them, how it's going to make them more productive. And again, back to the hybrid working, giving them that work lifestyle flexibility.
And so Al, just to pick up on that though, so that's brilliant. There's obviously some fantastic features that sit within Teams. But if you're a finance or an insurance firm and you're highly regulated, what are some of the challenges about kind of rolling Teams out from a communications or even a collaboration perspective?
Well, again, that's if you're a trader, for example, and we've seen the the FCA have started tightening things up now. People have been given a bit of slack, through the pandemic, to make sure that they're getting everything, the technology in place that is needed to meet those regulatory compliance. So it's about using, but obviously Mike, this better than anybody, hybridized environments where you might have on-premise Actions or anything else, and then you start to think, right, well, I need to have something which is more flexible, which is more cloud-based, because everybody wants everything off-premise now, I want everything in the cloud, and it's those challenges, how you get from point A to point B, and make sure that you are meeting those regulatory compliance needs.
Yeah, and what about from a recording perspective?
Yes, so from a recording perspective, the challenges you get, as I mentioned up front, is firstly the infrastructure challenges initially from an on-prem recording, where typically depends on which you are working with. But in the smaller enterprise, it's normally something that you have to do a packet sniff or something to record, and then you have the at-home user that you have to target from an endpoint point of view. Now with Teams, there's the flexibility where initially it's record everything, but recording has become smarter now. So things like only record what we want to record in a compliant way. So everyone wants to record automatically, generally in compliance, not just press a button and put it in the hands of the person, make it centralized, encrypted. You can tamper with it. Now there are ways to record everyone flexibly at home with a wide range of rules that you can say, for example, okay, everyone who was normally having internal meetings in the office that weren't recorded, but initially, everything's recorded. There are ways now how to say, okay, record everybody, but don't do their internal calls. Only record our meetings if there are external participants who attend those meetings. So technology is really evolving now to more complement this environment that we're living in today from a compliance point of view. And yeah, maybe, and I hope you don't mind, maybe that's an interesting segue into the slide you're showing, because just at a high level to explain, even from a Teams point of view, how simple is it's become, instead of just simply port mirroring and having to, figure out where to port mirror, Cisco and Avaya have directed audio integration. There is SIPREC, but you're also limited what you can record with SIPREC. But in a Teams environment, it's essentially through the Microsoft Graph framework, the APIs, where it's a quick setup. There are platforms that are completely managed services, so you're not deploying a whole infrastructure. Everything is secure in country, in Azure. Storage can be your own storage in Azure as well. And it's really as simple as putting an enterprise application into your apps or into your AD, and then what you do is you create an application instance, a recording policy, sync the policy to those users you want recorded, and no matter where they are, when they get on a call, it will detect that they have a policy, invite a bot into the call, as an invisible participant. There are ways to make announcements, calls are recorded, and then stream the audio encrypted back and store it in terms of all the compliance rules in a tenant of yours that's segregated, dedicated, and available to you. Now, again, while natively it will record everything, you can be on the beach on your mobile phone talking on Wi-Fi through a near restaurant and still record it. You have rules now as well that you can restrict, even though it's on an automatic basis, but much more elegant, much simpler. I know, just reminiscing, and I don't want to say it's reminiscing, but Els mentioned Skype for Business a few times, but we played a lot in that space as well. And you could have a deployment of 500 active targeted users for Skype for Business taking a month or two to deploy. You can deploy someone now with Teams recording in less than an hour or two. So it's become a really, really, it's a positive addition to what you can do.
And from an FCA, MiFID II, other regulatory kind of requirements, it kind of meets everything that
yeah, absolutely. You have the encryption, you have the roles-based security, you have the restricting of who can play back, there's the ability to share links to calls without downloading unencrypted files. In fact, even some of these products now have their own built-in record on demand through native Teams apps. So even if you do decide you want to use some sort of record on demand, you still have it in a more compliant way than simply just having a file going unencrypted to a OneDrive location or to just a file storage. And you have the ability to really record everything, not just, say, PSTN calls. So you have that flexibility to record whatever you want to.
Okay, and I'm just going to flick onto this slide. Is that something you wanted to pick up on as well, Mike?
Yeah, that's just a brief one. So having said all of this about that at home, there are options where you can combine at home and at work, because there is still this journey. So companies are still having a mix of using some on-prem PBX technology along with Teams. So they might still have a certain element of their organization. You have these abilities as well to record those locally and push them up to the cloud into your archive, which is compliant, so that you have all your data stored alongside each other, instead of having all these fragmented pieces of data to manage in different locations. Nothing worse for a compliance manager to have a list of 30 locations where they have to go and manage where all their data is sitting. It's much easier to have a centralized repository that is easier to manage and maintain.
Well, it sounds good, and it sounds pretty compelling as a solution to that technology. Sorry, that communication conundrum that finance firms often have when it comes to thinking about regulated, compliant communications. So it sounds like there's a good solution there in place. But Al, I'm going to come to you next, because obviously looking beyond that Teams kind of capability side of things, there are other benefits and other add-ons onto Teams that can also create a really integrated communications kind of infrastructure, if you like, aren't there?
Yeah, no, exactly that. And I've been around the UC market for longer than I care to remember. And part of the reason why Bytes and Teleware have such a strong strategic relationship, and this is from a personal perspective, is it's not just about voice, Teams voice, of how you sort of look at that. There's various different component parts that you need to look at. So when we're talking around call recording, there's obviously the mobile as well, which needs to be covered off. There's things like contact center. So again, in this new world of using bots, there's a lot you can do with that, but also, those omni-channel contact centers, the way you need to take in lots of different information and store that and make sure that you're managing that properly, as well as the ability to do things like BYOD, bring your own device where you've got your own mobile phone, but it's also segmented from a directory perspective, so you can have that as your work phone as well. All of these things are kind of considerations to look at, especially from a consolidation standpoint, and being able to manage endpoint more effectively, and obviously working with the guys at Teleware, who for everybody's benefit, are multidisciplined Microsoft Gold partner with not just from a comms perspective, but also security and R&D, from chatbot development to virtual assistants, right through to all of those key elements around being an ISV, so in-house development, DevOps guys who can develop technology in line with customer expectations, which is it's a huge thing, and it's done in such a speed, where you used to have to wait 6 to 12 months for a piece of technology to be developed. Using these bot frameworks, you can do things so much faster. And obviously, the key is it's about customer experience, from that front end, and giving the employees the best possible technology to be able to do their job.
Thank you for that, Al, and thank you for doing the teleweb there as well. Appreciate that.
That's
So
okay.
one thing I did want to say to the audience, which I should have perhaps said a little bit earlier, is yes, if you've got any questions for our panelists, do use the question function on screen and fire those questions through. We are getting 1 or 2 coming through. If you've got any, then do fire them through. We've got a few minutes before I'm going to be coming to the questions section. But before we do that, I've got a question for you, audience. So, having heard what our panelists have been talking about today and kind of where you might be considering teams, so I just wanted to kind of ask you and get a gauge of where you are on your kind of thinking about teams as a compliant telephony solution. So, have you already, or are you considering teams as a compliant telephony solution? So, if you choose the answer that is kind of most close to where you are, so no, we're not considering this as an option. Yes, we are considering Teams as a telephony solution, and we've already implemented Teams for telephony. So I'll just give you a few seconds to answer that question. And I'll try to figure out why I can't do that.
So we've got the results back there. So 6%, no, we're not considering this as an option. A staggering 71%, yes, we are considering Teams as a telephony solution. And 24% already implemented it.
Right, okay, well that's, I think, 1, encouraging, 2, positive. Any particular views from both of you on that?
I mean, it's from my perspective, obviously, being the Microsoft UC specialist that advises, the amount of customers that I've been working with over the last couple of years, and I mean, it's running into hundreds that have not only thought about it but implemented it and are using it. It definitely shows the move to what I classify as hyperscale cloud computing, and that is the future of where everything is going, whether you're sat on Microsoft, whether you're sat on Cisco, whether you're sat on Avaya, which is now owned by RingCentral. But this is all, it's all cloud-based technology. So, it makes more sense for people to move that direction and obviously collapse everything into one GUI, and have all communication modalities running through that.
Yeah, and I think based on that poll, and I think that's why we're here today, one of my hints, and I know we were going to talk about certain maybe advice, but one of the things we've seen is how what we do drive people to adopt Teams. People think, okay, we can't move to Teams because, oh, what are we going to do about our recording, or what are we going to do about our contact center? So perhaps some of that 0% of not consider, or 6% of not considering it, maybe from the evolution of today's discussion might have sparked something that's, hold on a second, something that might have held me back from moving. It's available, it's there, I can do it. We've seen it all the time right up front. Before, when the APIs for recording were, hanging in that limbo, we were part of the tap for that. We had customers saying, listen, when's it coming? We cannot push the button to move until we have that that recording element for us in place. So I think this education, which, Mark, what you guys are doing, and Al and everyone educating, I think is fantastic, because I think the more people learn that it isn't this big beast that you can have it all with it. I think that's the important thing to understand.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, that, Mike. So let's come on to the hints and tips. So you're both experts in this field. You've got lots of customers who are either doing it or have done it. What would you say, kind of the 2 or 3 things that you would say people who are going to be moving on this journey should absolutely do, or indeed not do? I'll come to you first, Mike.
So look for flexibility. You don't have to just settle for something. Look for the flexibility to be able to, really customize according to what you need. In our space, especially, make sure whoever you work with is certified, because there's a lot that goes behind certification, security certifications. You need Premier support so that you can back up and support whatever you're doing. So that is, from my perspective, very, very important. And as Al said, do your research. Make sure that you're covered, and you use someone who, like this partnership that we all have. Make sure that the team that you're working with really understands it and helps you do your due diligence and guides you along the path that you're going.
Great, thank you for that, Mike. And Al, I'll come to you next.
Yes, there's quite a few, so I'll rattle them on quite quickly. So, definitely work with a Microsoft certified architect if you are looking at deploying Teams and Voice. These UC specialists have tons and tons of knowledge, not only just about certain vendors, but generally a very agnostic view. It can help you really navigate around that landscape. And obviously, I'm here from a buyer's perspective to help you guys as well. And the couple of things that a lot of people kind of don't think about is around network testing, right? Because this new hybrid environment, where we've gone from 2 years ago, people not using video, to now everybody's using video. You start to bring in room systems, you start to stress the network out, you get that quality of experience. It's really impacts on end user and customers. So, and there's loads of tooling out there that can help you do that due diligence in terms of things like synthetic transactions, stress testing the network, looking at where you might have jitter or problems. Before people move back into the office, it's so important to do that, because then you can fix that issue before you roll out into full production. And again, change management and adoption, that is so critical to the success of rolling out Teams, Voice, and any other core component parts that sit around that. So that's my top tips.
I'm going to add one more in. Have a look at workshops that are available, because I think that that's definitely something that can actually help you to scope out what you need and what you want as an organization. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, there's obviously there's tons of funded workshops that you can look at. Obviously, speak to your account manager. We work very closely with Microsoft as well, that has funded workshops for customers. So, and getting that real technical knowledge and having somebody come in to actually do all the design work for you based on your requirements, on your infrastructure and what you have today, and then work looks like to get from A to B. Is critically important, and also you'll see all the commercials around that as well. So it just helps you make that business plan a lot more valid.
Which beautifully leads into the next and final poll question, because we do have some Microsoft Modernized Communications workshops that are available to customers and to new customers and existing customers. So if you would be interested in registering an interest in taking part in one of these workshops, please feel free to answer this poll question. So would you be interested in a Modernized Communications workshop which covers Microsoft Teams telephony? Yes, no, or maybe. I don't think we need to show the results on that one, but it's useful in terms of helping us to follow those of you up who are interested in taking the next step there. So I'll just give you a few seconds to answer that. And whilst you are answering that, I'll come on to questions that we've had. So one person has asked a question about volumes of people or companies who are actually kind of migrating already to Microsoft Teams. Obviously, we got the poll question, which is indicative of people who are attending the webinar today. But so I'm not expecting you to quote numbers here because it's quite a difficult one. But so are you seeing a rush for finance firms to Teams? Are they kind of being a bit more cautious around that? What are your thoughts on that kind of adoption of Teams as a telephony and compliance way?
We're definitely 100% seeing it. It's not just from financial services and insurance companies. It's across the board really. There's people look to this new hybrid working, look to make the end user's life a lot more easier. And look, in this new world, the point of people making outbound PSTN calls as opposed to like using Teams and sending meetings like that, all of that's starting to change the landscape of how people work traditionally. It also helps with things like cost consolidation as well. So there's a lot of pros to kind of moving and having a look at that. And obviously getting rid of a lot of complexity of on-premise equipment and having somebody else manage all that for you, is definitely where we're seeing a lot of people move to, because it allows those IT teams to start doing more and start, investing in technology, what they can do to improve on productivity. So you go into the whole power suite element, then, looking at ways of having those efficiency gains and productivity gains is definitely been, part of the conversation.
Thank you, Al. We've had another couple of questions, which I think are quite interesting. They're on a similar theme, which is about replication of a traditional, maybe PBX system where you've got, call queues set up, or you might have old style pickup groups. How easy is it to actually replicate that in a Teams environment?
It's a really good question, actually, because there is a lot of misconception out there, and I will say quite a bit of mis-selling that goes on from people saying, actually, you need another PBX over the top of Microsoft Teams, and it's not necessarily true. Teams natively can do a lot around, front-ended IVRs, obviously responsibility groups, and how you configure that. And then there is other, Microsoft technology that sits over the top of that. So, from a Teleweb perspective, they've developed their own IVRs and call flows, which you can just do on the fly, which will go as deep as you want to. There is other providers out there that provide those third-party complementary products. So I would say, again, do your due diligence, work with, Microsoft certified architect. If you're looking at a PBX that you've been managing on premise, but you haven't necessarily got any idea how that's configured, there's technology that can do data dips into those PBXs, extract all the configs, and then basically you can work with an architect to say, right, what feature functionality maps across natively into Teams? If it doesn't, then what can we do to plug that technology gap? So there's a ton of different things to take into consideration there.
Thanks, Al. And Mike, so have you got anything to add to that?
Yeah, so just maybe referring back to the initial question, and I'm just going to be reading it to you because this was announced last night by Microsoft. Over 90% of Fortune 500 companies use Teams Phone this quarter, and they continue to take share across PSTN and VoIP. And then also the monthly usage of third-party applications and custom-built solutions in Teams has grown 10x in the last 2 years. So those are huge stats. The number of active team rooms devices doubled last year. Frontline workers up 2 times. So there's some. It's a success. It's a huge success story.
Yeah, thank you for that. And then one final question, because we're going to need to wrap things up. So somebody's said that our business requires phone numbers with Jersey dialing codes. These are currently not available in Teams. Do we know if there's a timeline of when more dialing codes will become available?
It's a tricky one, obviously, in Jersey and Guernsey, because you've still got basically ISDN out there that's controlled by, a one telco provider. So, there is ways around it, but it means you have to put something effectively like an SBA on location in Guernsey, connect it to that provider. So obviously, ISDN is going to be retired at some point, so I'd say just watch that space. But at the moment, if you do need those numbers, then you'll need an SBC or an SBA on premise somewhere to terminate those trunks again, so you get those numbers.
Thank you very much. So we're going to need to wrap things up now. First of all, I would like to thank both of you. I think it's been a really interesting conversation today. Thank you for your time. Thank you, in particular, Mike, for getting up so early and joining us out. So really appreciate that. Thank you to everybody who watched and listened today and contributed by answering poll questions or submitted questions for the panelists today. If you have got any questions that we've not had time to answer, do still feed them through, and we will get back to you on email or on phone call with any of that. Give us your information. And yes, enjoy the rest of your day, everybody. Take care and see you soon.
Thanks all. Have a good day.
Thank you.
Yes, bye-bye.
Thanks all. Bye-bye.